The forest was silent that morning. 6 males moved through the trees without making a sound. No calls, no display. They traveled low and fast, the way animals move when they already know what they're looking for. Ahead of them, a chimpanzee named Goodall sat alone in a tree feeding. He was not a stranger to these males. He had grown up with them, shared food with them, been groomed by them. Whatever separation had opened between them over the past 2 years, he had not yet understood what it meant. He understood it on January 7th, 1974. The males dragged him down from the tree and held him against the ground. Humphrey, Figgin, Jomeo, Sherry, Everett, Rodolph. 6 of them, one of him, for 10 unbroken minutes. When they finally retreated, they called out and drummed on trunks and threw branches into the canopy. A sound researchers would later describe as a triumph display. Goodall did not get up. What happened in that clearing had never been recorded before, not in decades of primate research, not across any field site in the world. The notes from that morning marked the first time male chimpanzees had been documented deliberately attempting to kill another male. But that was only the beginning of what the field notes would record. Today you will discover that the most brutal war in the animal kingdom wasn't fought by lions, crocodiles, or any predator with claws. It was fought by animals that can mourn their dead and use tools. This is where the case gets even stranger. So if you're interested in this story, subscribe, and let's continue. Jane Goodall had arrived at Gombe Stream in 1960 believing she was entering a world that might correct something in ours. For months, the chimpanzees refused to let her close. She sat at the edge of their range for weeks, keeping still, keeping distance, waiting for the forest to accept her. It took a long time. When it finally did, what she found confirmed what she had come hoping to find. Animals that used tools, formed deep bonds, grieved their dead, raised their young with patience and care. She began giving them names. That was the move that changed everything about what came later. Not methodology, not equipment, the names, Figgin, Goliath, David Greybeard, Sniff, Hugh, Charlie, Willy Wally. Each name attached to one individual face, one individual history, one known place inside a web of relationships that had been building since before Goodall arrived. It took years of presence to build that knowledge, but when it was built, it became a record no one had ever produced before. A detailed, named, longitudinal account of a wild chimpanzee community across decades. The community she documented was a single social group. Around 50 animals sharing one continuous territory in the valleys above Lake Tanganyika, steep forested hillsides, stream valleys, fig trees, and palms. They groomed each other, shared meat after hunts, navigated a status hierarchy with alliances and personal histories behind every relationship. By 1971, the field notes were already showing something different. A computer analysis of Goodall's records would later map what the researchers were watching in real time without fully understanding. The northern and southern males were spending less time together. Encounters between the two clusters were shifting in tone. By 1972, the two sides had effectively stopped socializing. They moved as separate groups within the same territory. Nobody had drawn a line on a map. Nobody had declared anything. But the line was already there. Over roughly 8 months in 1973 and 1974, the split completed. 6 adult males broke south with 3 adult females and their young. They settled in the lower range along Kahama Stream. The group that held the northern territory, which would become known as Kasakela, kept 8 adult males, 12 adult females, and their young. 6 males, against 8. Goodall found out what that math meant on January 7th. The attack on Goodall could have been explained as a territorial confrontation, a border skirmish that went further than anyone expected. something that gets filed as an anomaly and watched for recurrence. The second attack could not. Shortly after Godey's death, another Kahama male named Day was found by a Kasakela patrol and beaten badly. He survived, injured, driven further into the southern range. And in this second incident, a female named Gigi was observed fighting alongside the Kasakela attackers. Gigi was not a stranger. She was an animal the researchers had known for years, sterile, unusually active in the affairs of adult males, and now crossing the line the war was drawing, not as a bystander, as a participant, on the attacking side. One of their own was hunting with the group that had just killed Godey. The first death could have been explained away. The second one could not. A pattern was forming, and in that pattern, a question that had no clean answer. Why did a community that had once groomed and fed and traveled together start trying to erase one half of itself? Goodall had documented Goliath since the early years at Gombe. He was old now, worn at the joints, slower than he had once been, no longer the kind of male other animals deferred to on raw power. But in the original unified community, Goliath had carried weight. He had been high-ranked, respected, a figure other males navigated around. By the time the split happened, that authority had faded. What remained was something harder to describe: a male who had relationships on both sides of the new line, and seemed to behave as though the line did not fully apply to him. He was seen moving through both ranges, groomed by males who were now, technically, enemies. He appeared at ease in Kahama territory and Kasakela territory both. If he understood what the attacks on Godey and Day meant for him, he kept approaching the Kasakela males. A patrol found him sometime in 1974 or 1975. Goodall recorded what followed. Figan, a Kasakela commander, a male who had grown up in the same community as Goliath, who had known him since he was young, charging and hitting again and again, the stricken, quivering body of Goliath, one of his childhood heroes. The attackers drummed on trees, threw rocks, threw branches, called out in what the researchers described as a triumph display. Goliath died of his wounds the next day. Goodall wrote later that she often woke in the night with horrific pictures springing unbidden to her mind. She had arrived at Gombe, believing chimpanzees were gentler than humans. She spent years building a body of work that celebrated their intelligence, their social bonds, their capacity for care. The war did not erase that work, but it forced her to hold something darker alongside it. The field notes continued. After Goliath, the Kahama males began disappearing without leaving bodies. Hugh had been one of the founders of the breakaway group. He had defied the Alpha, organized the separation, led others south to the Kahama Range. The community that was now being hunted existed in part because Hugh had decided it would. Then one day, he simply stopped appearing in the records. No encounter recorded, no remains found. Goodall listed him as missing, presumed killed. A leader gone with no trace. The cause unknown. The body never located. Just silence from the part of the forest where he used to move. Charlie was the last capable male Kahama had left. The polio that had moved through the Gombe community in earlier years had not spared him. It had left him with partial paralysis, moving slowly on damaged limbs. He was killed in 1977. Whether his condition made him easier to find or easier to overwhelm, the field notes do not say. They record only that he was found. Not long after, Willie Wally disappeared. Another polio-crippled Kahama male, barely mobile, unable to run. He was never found. The story does not end there. It gets worse. By the time 1977 turned toward 1978, every Kahama adult male was gone or unaccounted for, except one. Sniff was an adolescent when the war began. He had spent 4 years watching the southern community shrink around him, older males disappearing one by one, the range going quieter, the Kasakela patrols pressing deeper. By late 1977, he was the last male left in Kahama territory. He survived alone for over a year. The researchers tracked his movements through what had once been a community's territory, a single animal holding to a range that had no one left to defend it, feeding alone, sleeping alone, moving without the cover of a group. There was a period where it seemed possible he might find another path, cross into a different community to the south, somehow be absorbed back into Kasakela. There was no other path. A Kasakela patrol found him. Goodall recorded what she was told of the encounter with the precision she brought to everything. Satan, cupping his hand below Sniff's chin to drink the blood that welled from a great wound on his face. After that encounter, Sniff's name stopped appearing in the records. Of the Kahama females, 1 was killed, 2 disappeared, 3 were beaten and pulled into the Kasakela group by force. The community that had broken south in 1973 and 1974 was gone. Every adult male dead or missing. The surviving females absorbed by force into the group that had hunted them. The territory cleared. Science eventually gave the behavior a name: coalitionary killing. Researchers studying chimpanzee violence across multiple sites, including sites where no food provisioning had ever occurred, found the same pattern. Lethal intergroup aggression had been documented at 7 of 8 never-provisioned study sites. The behavior was not invented at Gombe. It was observed there first because Goodall had been present long enough and close enough to see it complete.
Of blood,
But a
brain,
second
and
question
emotion
entered the scientific literature and has never left it. Goodall's team had provisioned the Gombe chimpanzees with bananas for years to keep them accessible, to study them at close range. Critics argued that this created conditions that would not exist in the wild: artificially concentrated groupings, elevated competition, social stress amplified by human presence. Margaret Power laid out the full argument in 1991. Others followed. If the feeding stations had manufactured the aggression, or amplified it beyond anything that would have happened otherwise, then what the researchers witnessed was partly a consequence of witnessing it. That question has not been resolved. The defenders of the natural violence interpretation pointed to those 7 unprovisioned sites, to the cross-site data, to the fact that the social rift at Gombe was visible in field notes from 1971, 2 years before any open violence. Both sides have published data. Neither has closed the case. The mechanism exists. The mechanism is documented. Whether this specific war ran on that mechanism alone, or whether the people who came to watch also, without knowing it, helped to start what they were horrified to record, that belongs to science. And science has not answered it. The Kasakela moved into the range they had spent 4 years clearing. They held it briefly. Then Mitumba from the north and Kalande from the south pressed in. Larger communities with no connection to the war, no interest in its history, only in the ground it had left undefended. The Kasakela retreated. The map changed back. The missing names did not. The scientific community is still divided. One side says this was innate chimpanzee behavior seen across Africa. The other says Goodall's banana feeding station triggered a war that would never have happened. Which side are you on? Let me know in the comments.